recovery from autism, and I've started saying recovering from the disabling aspects of autism.
Right.
Because many people have told me that they're offended when I use the term recovery, and I've said to them I can't stop talking about the concept.
Right.
So I would love it if you could give us a clinician's point of view about what it is that we're talking about when we say recovery.
Okay. So it's possible there's a better term for recovery and we just haven't identified it yet. But currently recovery from a clinician's point of view in the world of autism means that the individual is within one standard deviation from the mean on standardized assessments. It means that they no longer really qualify for the diagnosis of autism. So if they were to go see a professional and have one of the, gold standard assessments conducted, they would no longer actually qualify for the diagnosis. And sometimes they will actually go ahead and remove that diagnosis. And also it means going into a regular education placement without an aid. And for the most part, just being able to demonstrate, living in a way that you're indistinguishable from your peers. It doesn't mean you're perfect. It doesn't mean that you don't still maybe have little issues here or there, but everyone does.
Right.
So from a clinician's perspective, that's recovery.
Okay. I want to go back through and talk about some of the different things, though. When you say one standard deviation from the mean on standardized testing, for those of us who aren't very familiar, what does that actually show up as?
Right. So you get a score like on an IQ test, for example, and maybe what would be considered like typical would be 100.
Okay.
And so one standard deviation would be about 15 points below that, so anywhere between like 85 and 100.
Okay. All right, and so it could be an IQ test, it could be something else, just some sort of standardized testing.
A lot of times it's IQ, and then in addition to that, there might be other tests done, like adaptive tests, such as the Vineland and things like that, like a battery of assessments maybe done.
Okay.
Yeah.
So saying that you're in the mix, you're in the neighborhood of...
Yeah, you're like within the kind of range of what would be considered typical or of someone.
Okay, and just to be clear, we're talking about individuals that at some point got a diagnosis of autism from a qualified professional, because a lot of times people say, it's interesting to me how people try to wheedle out of the person actually being that has the designation of recovered. And what we'll hear sometimes is, well, I don't think that person actually had autism.
I hear that all the time.
It's so disconcerting to me that's the fail-safe point that they go back to.
I know.
What's the likelihood? I mean, I guess that some people are misdiagnosed, but that seems something that's really difficult to me, to be misdiagnosed and be given an autism diagnosis. Because I know for Jem, he not only got the diagnosis, then we were forced to go get a corroborating diagnosis before we could get funding. And, then he would get tested every year and still would qualify. Are there other people that just walk into some Joe Schmo's office and get a diagnosis that isn't? Is there any basis for people to think that that's a possibility?
The reason why it would be difficult to be misdiagnosed is because, yes, I would say like a majority of the population probably under the 3 areas that they assess would maybe have a couple little things that they would go, oh, I do that.
Right.
When you look at the list of the symptoms or whatever, the behaviors. But the truth is you can't just only do 1 or 2 of these things. You have to be within all of the categories. So in order to be within all of the categories and have the correct number, that's more difficult. So I don't see how that would be happening all the time. Now, that's not to say that it doesn't happen sometimes.
Right.
There might be that kiddo who's like right on the edge. And for whatever reason, I don't know, but maybe, the person doing the diagnosis really can see that child could benefit from services. And for some reason, they're a little biased maybe, and they let them kind of squeeze in there. You know what I'm saying?
I do, and I think that there's a possibility of that happening, but I think what we see far more often is kids that they're squeakers and they're on the line. They've got things that are going on that are disabling them, but they don't fully qualify for the diagnosis. So in the past, they would have gotten the PDD-NOS. I've heard that hundreds of times from parents who said, my kid didn't quite qualify for the autism diagnosis. They got a PDD-NOS.
Right.
So, and then sometimes later on, on, that what happens is that person who was diagnosing only saw them for a 20-minute or a 2-hour period of time out of their life, gave them a PDD-NOS, and we see 2 years down the road that now this kid qualifies for the full diagnosis of autism. So I think that's far more common, that somebody gets underdiagnosed instead of getting overdiagnosed.
Especially if they can compensate for the weaknesses,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and the likelihood that if you're only seeing somebody for 20 minutes or 2 hours, I think it's far more likely that somebody could miss a behavior that didn't come up on the criteria, and the person could get underdiagnosed. Then it just so happened that the 2 hours that they came in and were seen by this trained professional, they were more on the autism spectrum during that 2 hours. That seems unlikely.
Yeah. I hope no one's doing this within 20 minutes.
Yeah, I hope so too. I hope so too.